It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 31, looking at the players of the 2025 African Cup. This episode is looking at the players of Ivory Coast. Part 2, the selections. Here we go! Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and this is a continuation of Series 31 on the players of the 2025 African Cup. This episode is part 2 of our coverage on Ivory Coast's players. The final roster is released and we're looking at the selections of Ivory Coast. In part 1, we compiled a list of players and their likelihood of reaching the final squad. That was based mostly on their participation from after the 2023 African Cup, that was in January of 2024, up until the October 2025 games, so the conclusion of World Cup qualifying there. And we did consider a few other factors as we put the players on the list of likelihood. We also gave some biographical / career information on the main players to help you to get to know them better. In part 2 here, our focus is on the selections, especially the final selections. But before we move on, we want to let you know that in the springtime of 2026, probably April, we'll start producing episodes for the 2026 World Cup, which of course takes place in the summer of 2026. So keep an eye out for that, or better yet, subscribe to the channel and it will notify you when the episodes come out. Okay, this mediacast is divided into 3 sections. Just like in part 1, section 1 is dedicated to team information. This will be shorter though than the section in part 1. Section 2 here is the main part of the mediacast. We review the list that we compiled in part 1 and we'll tell you who made the preliminary and final squad. We also tried to predict starters. We took steps towards that in part 1 by providing a narrative of each position over the period. We'll summarize that by letting you know who we think the starters will be. We didn't actually talk about that in part 1, but we did make notes on it. We're going to look at the lineups in the games played after 2025 to see if they give any further clues as to who will start. So, and finally, we'll produce a revised predictions of our starters. In section 3, we're going to start with a spotlight review. That's kind of a review of everything we've done so far, a quick run through the main players who made and didn't make the squad and our predicted starters. And we'll also review surprise selections and non-selections, as well as any new players making the final squad there. So, and finally, we'll update on injuries. Ivory Coast had a few of those. All right, let's jump right into section 1, some team information there. In part 1, we looked at the club affiliations of players, the games they played over the recent period, and their preferred formations. Here we're focusing on what the team published. Teams were required to submit a preliminary roster of up to 55 players to CAF, the organizers of the tournament, kind of Africa's version of FIFA. For the 2023 African Cup, CAF actually published those lists, so that was nice and easy. Some teams didn't like that, though. They felt it had some negative effects. So this time it was up to the teams as to whether they published or not. I actually used Google's AI, Gemini, to get the 55-man roster. But in the process of doing so, I became a bit doubtful about its sourcing and accuracy. I got to say that's really for other teams than Ivory Coast. And even for those other teams, it was really just in a few of the finer details there. So overall, I think the rosters are fairly accurate. At the risk of a few mistakes, we're going to use the information for the 55-man preliminary roster here. The final rosters, on the other hand, are very accurate. So teams were allowed to bring 28 players to the tournament. Ivory Coast actually just brought 26 players to the final squad. And so that means they would have to cut 29 players from the squad. They made some surprising cuts, actually. And There we have it. And before we move on to section 2 and see who those players were, let's take a look at the games played after October 2025. They're going to help us, hopefully help us determine our predictions for the starting lineup. On November 14th, well, most teams played a couple of friendlies in November. Ivory Coast, of course, directly qualified for the World Cup, so didn't have to play any playoff games there. So just friendlies here. November 14th, they played in Saudi Arabia. They lost that game 1-0. And then on November 18th, they played in Oman. They won that game 2-0. We actually don't really care what the scores were. We're more interested in the lineups for those games. And I can tell you here, the lineups for the second game seem more experimental than for the first game there. But that will be a focus at the end of each section, is who started in what positions over those games. Okay, that brings us to the end of section 1. So we move on to our main order of business here, the candidates who made the squad. And let's begin with the manager. So if you recall, well, no, hang on, let me just go back a bit to part 1 here and say that in part 1 we used this opportunity to talk about the team's fortunes over the past few years, 4 or 5 years, and the manager in charge of those fortunes, let's say. If you recall, Emers Faye came in after the disastrous group stage of the last African Cup, which Ivory Coast hosted. They had tried to draft in Hervé Renard, a former manager, pretty famous manager there, but eventually had to settle on Emers Faye. But he did a great job leading them through to win the title, and he was made their permanent manager thereafter. So Emers Faye is in charge throughout this period, and we'll mark him with a green highlight to indicate that he is effectively a successful selection for the squad here. All right, let's move on to goalkeepers and look at the list from part 1, see who we had. We had as a definite candidate Yahya Fofana, who was selected for the final squad. And then we had a likely candidate, Mohamed Kone, also selected. 2 possible candidates. The first one was newcomer Alban Lafont. He was selected for the final squad, but Badra Ali Sanger, the other possible candidate, only making the preliminary squad there. And then at the seemingly off the squad level, we had Charles Foley, or Charles Foley Aye, and he only made the preliminary squad, which is not bad considering that he seemed to be off the squad. We have 2 new candidates to add from the list here, and by new I mean that they weren't on our list in part 1. Basically, we only put players on the list if they had played in 2024 or 2025. So actually the second candidate here is quite experienced with the national team, but wasn't on our list because he had last appeared before 2024. Anyway, the first of those players is Issa Fofana, and the second one, Ira Tape, or Ira Eliezer Tape. Both of those teams both of those players just making the preliminary squad there. So we won't spend more time on them unless they make the final squad there. Okay, so there are our 3 candidates then, Yahya Fofana, Mohamed Kone, and Alban Lafont. Let's go to see what our thoughts were at the end of part 1 in terms of starters. After part 1, we thought Yahya Fofana was still the number 1, but there was an increasing threat from Alban Lafont. As we said in part 1, he had switched his national allegiance from France to Ivory Coast. So in the fall of 2025, the last games in the period we looked at, Fofana had started 3 of those games, but Lafont had been given the start in 1 of those. The November friendlies, when we look at them, we see them sharing the duties. So Fofana starting the first game there against Saudi Arabia, and Lafont the second. And Oh, I should have mentioned what we thought at the end of part one before talking about the November games. We thought Yahia Fofana was the likely starter and Alban Lafont was a possible starter. Well, given that they shared the games in November, our opinion hasn't really changed. We consider Yahia Fofana still a bit ahead of Alban Lafont, although we do see kind of the threat of a challenge to his starting position there. Okay, that is it for goalkeepers. We move on to defenders and central defenders, where we had a definite candidate in Emmanuel Agbadou. Emmanuel Agbadou was selected for the final squad. Two likely candidates here, Evan Ndika and Odilon Kusunu. And yeah, if you want to know why we put them at the level we did, that would be, we explained in part one what our thinking was there. Kusunu was an injury concern, but the fact that he made it to the final squad should indicate how that turned out. We had five possible candidates here. The first one, Willie Bolly, was selected for the squad. In fact, the first three were the second, Ousmane Diomande, and the third one, actually, a central midfielder who, during this period, had been playing more as a centre back. That's Jean-Philippe Gbamin. He also was selected for the squad. The two other candidates, though, the possible level candidates, Clement Akpa only making the preliminary squad, and Junior Diaz not even making the 55-man preliminary squad there. Nor did Cedric Kipre, our possible but unlikely candidate there, not making the preliminary squad. However, Eric Bailly has did make the preliminary squad. I'm giggling to myself though because there was a little note included with Eric Bailly, included in the 55 preliminary squad, but deemed a technical exclusion for the final 26. Okay, what I take that to mean is that one of the problems I mentioned in section one, why teams didn't like the 55-man preliminary squad being published, was that it kind of raised the hope of some players, and especially players who they really had no intention of selecting. They were just kind of filling out the 55-man preliminary squad. I think that's at work here, where they put Eric Bailly on the squad to fill out the 55-man preliminary squad, but actually we're kind of indirectly telling him that he wasn't going to be selected there. So there's one other player they added that note to. So Eric Bailly making the preliminary squad, but kind of not really. We have several new players to add to our list, three of them, and none of them making the final cut, but all of them making the preliminary squad. The first one is Abakar Silla. The second one, Bamo Meiti. And the third one, Sinali Diomande. Sonali Diomande. All three of those players are under 25 years old, so potential candidates for the squad in the future. In fact, all of them have pretty good club affiliations there. But anyway, we're left with our six central defenders here, and let's take a look at what we thought after part one. We had as a likely starter Evan Ndika, and then as possible starters Odilon Kusunu and Emmanuel Agbadou. But things were a little unsettled at the end, so we thought, there may be even a couple of more possible starters there, but we wanted to look at the November games to kind of firm up our prediction. However, we didn't get much help there. Four different players started the November friendlies, and on our list of predictions, Ndika, Kusunu, and Agbadou, only Emmanuel Agbadou was among those four players. We did see Jean-Philippe Gbamin and Diomande. Both of those had played roles earlier in the period, so were not a surprise. The other one was Clement Akpa. and he turned out to be not selected. So clearly they're experimenting with backup players there. However, it really leaves us no clue as to who are going to be starters. But because Ndika didn't appear in either game, we're going to move him down to just the possible level, and also Emmanuel Agbadou. So we're going to represent that with stars. I forgot to do this with goalkeepers, so we'll go back and do it right away. But 1 star indicates a possible starting. We predict as a possible starter. We'll give that to Ndika and Agbadou. 2 stars would be a likely starter and 3 would be a definite starter. But things were kind of too unsettled with players coming in and out here for us to make a firm prediction. I'm just going to pop back to goalkeepers and give Yahia Fofana 2 stars as the likely starter, and Albon Lafont 1 star as a possible starter there. Okay, well, that's it for central defenders. Let's move on to the left back position. And here we begin with a definite candidate in Ghislaine Konan. Ghislaine Konan was selected for the final squad there, so we'll put him in a green highlight if you're watching the YouTube feed here. And we have a likely candidate in Christopher Oppery. He was an injury concern, but again, the fact that he was selected to the squad indicates that he's over or mostly over it. Down to the possible but unlikely level is our next candidate, Hussein Kamara. He was also an injury concern. We'll talk about it in section 3. But we think that his non-selection, he just made the preliminary squad there. We don't think that's actually related to his injury, but just the choice that the manager made. And finally, we have seemingly off the squad, Ismail Diallo. But he at least made the preliminary squad there. No new candidates here, so we move to our predictions. And here at the end of part 1, we thought Ghislaine Konan was a likely candidate and Christopher Oppery a possible starter there. Looking at the November friendlies, well, Oppery was out injured for those, so there was no chance of him starting. Perhaps he would have started one of the games had he not been injured. It was Ghislaine Konan starting both games there. We do think there's a slight chance of Oppery mounting a challenge for the starting spot, but we are going to, so my computer just did something funny. Where am I? There we go. We are going to stick with Ghislaine Konan as a likely starter there. We'll give him 2 stars. And Christopher Oppery, who is back to fitness now, we'll give him 1 star as a possible starter. Okay, that is left backs. Let's go over to the right side and see what we have. What we have is our definite candidate, Wilfred Singo, only making the preliminary squad. That is due to injury, so a big loss for them there. We look to the other candidates then. Likely candidate Guella Due was selected for the final squad. Possible candidate Zogby Luck. Well, no luck for him. He only made the preliminary squad there. But the other one, Armel Zuhuri, did make the final cut there. So that leaves us with Guella Due and Armel Zuhuri as the candidates who are going to make it. We also had Serge Aurier on the list, seemingly off the squad, and it does seem that he's off the squad, not selected even for the preliminary squad here. No new candidates to look at, so we can go to our predictions. Well, we knew that Wilfred Singo was injured, so we thought at the end of part 1 that he was the likely starter if he was fit. But as I say, we knew he might not be, so we thought any one of those 3 could be possible starters. Lux Zogby, Armel Zuhuri, or Guella Due. In fact, we gave the edge to Lux Zogby there because he had started 2 of the fall 2025 games, whereas Zuhuri and Due had only started 1 of them. The November friendlies, though, show that Luck did not start either of those. It was Due in the first and Zuhura in the second. And now we see that Zogby was not selected. So we were quite wrong in thinking that he was maybe the most likely among them. He was the least likely and not selected. So it seems an even battle now between Due and Zahora as to who will be the starter in the absence of Wilfred Singdo. So we'll give 1 star to each of them. Maybe favouring Due a little bit there, since we had considered him a likely candidate and Zuhuri just a possible there. Okay, that's it for defense. We move upfield to the defensive end of the midfield. And we begin with defensive midfielders. We're going to do defensive and central midfielders together here. We have a definite candidate in Ibrahim Sangare, who was selected for the squad. But then we have no candidates at the likely or possible level. We go all the way down to possible but unlikely. And all 3 of our candidates here just made the preliminary squad. The first one was Jean-Oud Aluhu. Sorry, let me try that again. Jean-Oud Aholu. Jean-Oud Aholu making the preliminary squad. Maury Gabain also making the preliminary squad. And Kader Keita. Preliminary squad. The last 2 there, Maury Gabain and Kader Keita, do kind of have an injury tag on them. We'll talk about that in section 3. Here we do have a surprise, though. Jean-Michael Seri, who seemed to be off the squad, was called back in. His experience was deemed vital, they said. And he had last appeared for the national team in October 2024. So not off the team for that long, actually, but he is 34 years old, so is aging out in general. Anyway, called back in for this tournament. And the other seemingly off the squad player was Idrissa Doumbia. He made the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. We had... I have to introduce John Michael Siri here because we didn't introduce players at the seemingly off the squad level. So Jean-Michael Siri, been with Ivory Coast since 2015, a veteran with 62 caps and 4 goals, and as I said, 34 years old. He's currently playing in Slovenia, probably their biggest club there, Maribor, since 2025. Prior to that, he was with a club in Saudi Arabia, and then a couple of clubs in England, Hull and Fulham. Pretty experienced player, though. He's played in France, Turkey, and other countries besides. His first tournament was the 2017 African Cup there. And he was, just checking carefully here, a part of all their tournaments. So part of all the African Cup tournaments from 2017 on. So that covers 4 tournaments. In the last African Cup, he was on the bench for the group stage games, which were a disaster. And then they brought him in to a starting position for the last 4 games there. So he came out kind of shining. But he had last appeared in October of 2024. So John Michael Seri, surprisingly making the final cut here. We also have 2 candidates to talk about. New candidates, and both of them just making the preliminary squad. The first one is Paul Akuku. Paul Akuoku, I think, actually. And the second one, Ebue Kouassi. Both of those just making the preliminary squad. And we're not going to do the predictions yet because we're going to introduce the central midfielders as well. So at the definite level for them, we have Frank Cassie, actually captain of the team this time. I was just checking to see if he was captain of the team last time, but I don't think he was. No candidates at the likely level, but 4 at the possible level. The first one, Seko Fofana, he's actually the only one who did make the final cut among these players. The middle two, Jean-Thierry Lazaire and Mohamed Diamande, both of those players just making the preliminary squad. And the last one, Pacome Zuzua, not even selected for the preliminary squad. Nor was possible but unlikely candidate Mario Dorgelis there. However, we do have a new player who did make the squad, and his name is Christ Inau Ole. Sorry, I'll say that again. Christ Inau Ule. And I've seen him listed just as C. Ule, who now is often not used as part of his name. Anyway, he's kind of an exciting candidate here. Let me tell you about him. Just 19 years old here. He got his first cap in November of 2025. So in these friendlies, he started one of them and subbed in for the other. And he's 19 years old, playing for Trabzonspor in Turkey since 2025. He played for Bastia in France before that, but he was born in the Ivory Coast there. So I'm just going to call him Ule, and there he is making the final squad. Okay, so now we have all of our candidates. I can't even fit them onto one screen here, but let's take a look and see if we can predict a starter. Well, actually, things were pretty stable in this section of the field. So after part 1, we had Frank Kessie as a definite starter and Ibrahim Sangare as a likely starter, Seko Fofana as a possible starters. They do sometimes use a 3-man midfield, but sometimes even when it's a 4-2-3-1, it's a central midfielder playing as an attacking midfielder. So we've sometimes treated that as a 3-man midfield anyway. Anyway, perhaps making Frank Kessie definite and Ibrahim Sangare likely is maybe overstating it a bit, because players did come in for single appearances, especially towards the end. However, we see that quite a few of those players were not selected for the final squad, so it kind of bolsters our confidence that they're relying on these players here. In fact, those two did start in the first November friendly, Frank Kessie and Ibrahim Sangare, but in the second, clearly it was experimental. The newcomer Ule is the only one worth mentioning. A couple of out-of-position players there, one of them not even making the squad. So we have not really changed our opinion here. We still see Frank Kessie as a definite starter, so we'll give him 3 stars. Ibrahim Sangare as a likely starter, so we'll put 2 stars next to his name, and Seko Fofana kind of comes in and out of this position there, so 1 star as a possible starter for him. All right, that's the central midfield. Let's see if we have any players coded as left or right midfielders. No, we do not. We had a couple of players actually coded there, but we moved them to positions that they played in more. So we can move right on up to the attacking midfield and begin with left attackers. And here we have one of the big surprises, our definite candidate, Simon Adingra, not selected for the final squad, just a preliminary squad candidates here. They say that he is officially out due to persistent fitness issues, which I find a bit odd because he seems to be starting for his club, but I haven't really looked into it in detail, so I'll take their word for it. But a big loss there. We had considered Simon Adingra as a definite candidate there. There were no candidates at the likely level, so we go to our 3 possible candidates at the our 3 candidates at the possible level. The first one, Yan Diomande, did make the final cut there, as did the second one, Bazoumana Toure. Bazoumana Toure making the squad. But the third one, Parfait Guillagon, not making the cut there, just on the preliminary squad. Okay, that is that. And we have 4 players seemingly off the squad. Actually, only one of them made the preliminary squad. Jonathan Bamba, Max Allen Gradell, and John Everett Kouassi, not even selected for the preliminary squad, but Christian Kouame did make the preliminary squad there. We're going to add Wilfried Zaha here as a new candidate, obviously not new to the team. He's coded as a forward or attacking midfielder, but kind of plays kind of plays in any position up front. We think it's good to introduce him right here, because with Adingra out, we think Zaha might be the player they rely on. We didn't have him on our list again because hadn't played in 2024 or 2025. So new here means kind of we hadn't introduced him in part 1. Since he did make the squad, though, we're going to introduce him because we didn't talk about him in part 1. Wilfried Zaha was actually trying to get onto the England squad around 2012-13, but he got 2 caps for them, but didn't make the squad. So he threw his lot in with Ivory Coast in 2017, and now has 33 caps and 5 goals for them. Zaha is 35 years old. He is currently on the roster of Galatasaray in Turkey since 2023, but he's been on loan and apparently tearing up the MLS with Charlotte FC in the USA since 2025. And yes, that is likely why he was brought back in. He has been with primarily associated with Crystal Palace and Man United in England, but we have a special fondness for Zaha because he did play with Cardiff when they were in the Premier League in 2014. So always we favour players who've been with Cardiff. In terms of tournaments then, the African Cup 2017 was his first one. He started all 3 games there, and selected for the 2019 and 2021 editions too. I should say in 2021, or was it in 2019, he lined up as a left attacking midfielder in that tournament. So he is familiar to this position. In 2023, he was kind of a surprise non-selection there, and has been off the team since October of 2023. But here he is, Wilfried Zaha, coming back into the fray. Now we can talk about the predictions for this thing. Well, Simon Adingra is the only player we could name at the end of part 1 as having a chance of starting. That's because it was a rotation of players, and mostly out of position players coming in and playing over here. For example, 4 different players had started each of the fall 2020-25 games. Jan Diomande actually was the last of those, and he started the first November friendly. The second November friendly was forward Jean-Philippe Crasso. So just another in a long line of single starters in this position, which makes it difficult to predict. And now we have to take Simon Adingra off the list, but we are going to put Jan Diomande and Wilfried Zaha as possible starters over here. We don't really have any evidence for Zaha, but just our kind of our thinking is that he might start over here. So 1 star for Jan Diomande there, 1 star for Wilfried Zaha. Over to the right attacking side, and here we had no candidates at the definite level, but 3 at the likely level. The first one, though, is a surprise. Nicolas Pepe, not selected for the squad, just making the preliminary squad. No reason for that other than the manager's decision. He had been fairly active over the period. That's why we had him as a likely candidate here. But not making the final cut there. Okay, the second one is likely candidate Umar Diakite, and he was selected for the squad. So too was the third likely candidate, Ahmad Diallo, there. We have no new candidates over here, so we can talk about our predictions. At the end of part one, there was so much chopping and changing that we were reluctant to nominate a candidate. We actually had in our notes that the starter is undefinable. Too many players coming in and out for us to land on one of them. However, maybe on rethinking it, we should have put Nicolas Pepe as a possible candidate because he had started about a third of the games, and Amad Diallo, since he had started 2 of the last 4 games. There. And actually, Amad Diallo did start the first November friendly, but then the forward Vacuum Bio continues the tradition of out of position players in single starts that we saw on the left side. That is the case on both of those sides. So all we can land on here is Amad Diallo as a possible starter over here. It could well be an out of position player. Okay, that's the right attack. Let's move to the central attackers. And here we have no definite or likely candidates. But at the possible level, Jeremy Boga, he just made the preliminary squad. The only other candidate we have on the list is the seemingly off the squad, Hamed Traore, and he also made the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut there. No new candidates here. Let's talk about the position. As I said when we were doing central midfielders, a lot of the time when it was a 4-2-3-1 formation, it was a central midfielder in the position, and kind of a different one every time. When it was a more attacking player, we saw Jean-Philippe Crasso in the position twice. But otherwise, it was various players filling the role. So we're not going to make a prediction here. In fact, our prediction will be that they won't use this position. Maybe I should write that down. Position not used. It wasn't used in the November friendlies either. So we're going to say it is likely that the position will not be used. Okay. There we go. We move to the forward line. No secondary strikers to talk about, so we jump straight to centre forwards. And on our list, we have Evan Guessand as a definite candidate. Actually, he didn't make the final cut, so that is a surprise there. Our likely candidate, Sebastian Haller, was selected for the final squad, but then just before the tournament, things got switched around there. Sebastian Haller picked up an injury, which we'll talk about in section 3, so he was replaced. We used kind of purple pink to show that he has been withdrawn from the squad, and Evan Guessand was called back in as a replacement for Sebastian Haller, so he did make the squad in the end. Still, we think it's surprising that he wasn't selected in the first place. We had 3 candidates at the possible level. The first 2 were selected. The first 2 were Vacuum Bio or Vacuum Issouf Bio, making the final cut there, and Jean-Philippe Crasso also making it. The third of the possible candidates, though, Emmanuel Latte Lath, not even selected for the preliminary squad there. And we had 2 seemingly off the squad players. The first one, Karim Konate, was selected for the preliminary squad. but not making the final cut. The second one, Benny Traore, not even making the preliminary squad there. And we did have one new candidate here, Wilfried Zaha, coded as a forward, but we moved him to the left attacking midfield and talked about him there. So the last thing we'll do here is talk about our predictions for starters over here. At the end of part one, we thought any one of these players could be starters. Sebastian Haller, Jean-Philippe Crasso, and even Garçon. Sebastian Haller actually did start the first friendly. He was still healthy at that time. It was a two-man forward line, though, and he started alongside Parfait Guillagon, who we introduced as a left attacking midfielder, but he didn't actually make the squad. Well, in fact, neither Haller or Guillagon ultimately made the final squad. In the second game, it was Evan Guessant as the lone forward. And so we are going to just stick, though, at the possible level with Jean-Philippe Crasso and even Guessant. Maybe we would put Guessant a little bit ahead there. Well, no, we wouldn't, because he wasn't selected for the final squad in the first place. So actually, logically, Jean-Philippe Crasso would be slightly more likely. We'll give 1 star to each of them, but we also recognize that it could be an out-of-position player starting here. For example, Wilfried Zaha could be a starter over here. All right, that concludes our business in section 2, and we're going to move on into section 3. And we want to welcome listeners to the short version of the mediacast here. We're going to begin with our spotlight review. That's a race through the squad, reviewing what we covered in section 2, or really what we covered in parts 1 and part 2 of the mediacast here, because in part 1 we kind of created the list by putting candidates in according to their likelihood of making the squad. And in part 2, we said who made the squad and who didn't, and predicted starters. So that's what we're going through on a motorcycle here. We begin with manager Emers Faye. He was selected for the final squad, or he continues as the manager. For goalkeepers, we have Yahya Fofana at the definite level. He was selected. So was our likely candidate, Mohamed Kone, and our first possible candidate, Alban Lafont. But the second possible candidate, Badra Ali Sangare, was not selected. He just made the preliminary squad there. And we're not going to talk about players below the possible level unless they were selected for the final squad. So we have our 3 goalkeepers here in terms of predictions. Of starters, we think Yahya Fofana is the likely starter. But we do think there's a bit of a challenge from Alban Lafont, so we put him as a possible starter there. Moving up to defence, we had a definite candidate in Emmanuel Agbadou, who was selected for the final squad. So too were our 2 likely candidates, Ivan Ndika and Odilon Kusunu. Both of those selected, and 3 of our 5 possible candidates also making the cut. Willy Bolly, Ousmane Diomande, and Jean-Philippe Gbamin. He's actually a central midfielder who we moved back here because he was playing in central defence during the period. However, the other 2 possible candidates did not make it. Clement Akpa making the preliminary squad there. Junior Diaz not even making the preliminary squad. Okay, the 5 central defenders, but we still have a bit of trouble predicting starters. So we're just going to say Emmanuel Agbadou is a possible starter and Evan Ndika a possible starter, especially the November friendlies kind of confused us a little bit there or made it difficult to predict. Okay, left backs, we had a definite candidate in Ghislaine Conan, who was selected for the final squad, as was our likely candidate Christopher Opary, both of those selected. For starters, we consider Ghislaine Conan a definite candidate and Christopher Opary a possible starter there. Over to the right back position, we begin with definite candidate. Wilfred Singo, he is out due to injury, so just made the preliminary squad there. We had one likely candidate, Guela Dua, Guela Due, and he did make the cut there. And we had two possible candidates. The first of them, Zogbe Luck, just making the preliminary squad, but the second one, Armel Zuhuri, selected for the final squad. With Wilfred Singo out, we considered him a likely starter, very likely really, but he's out. So we consider it a battle between the two players who made it, Guela Due and Armel Zuhuri. We slightly favor Due, but still have them both at the possible level there. Okay, on to defensive midfielders. We had a definite candidate in Ibrahim Sangare, who was selected for the final squad. And that's all we had over here at the definite, likely, or possible level. However, one of our seemingly off-the-squad players, Jean-Michel Seri, the veteran, was called back in for the tournament, so he was selected for the final squad there. We'll do central midfielders before we talk about starters. Central midfielders, we have a definite candidate in Frank Kessie. Frank Kessie was selected for the final squad. No candidates at the likely level, but 4 at the possible level. Only the first of them, though, was selected, Seko Fofana. And they had two of them. I'm losing my grip here. 2 of them made the preliminary squad: Jean-Thierry Lazer and Mohamed Diamande, both of those making the preliminary squad. But the 4th one, Pacome Zuzua, didn't even make the preliminary squad. And it might be a good time to say that they have only brought 26 of 28 allowable players to the Cup. So making some big decisions here. We're kind of surprised that there weren't a few more of these players selected. Anyway, in terms of starters, we think Frank Kessie is a definite starter there. And we think Ibrahim Sangare a likely starter. And we give 1 star to Seko Fofana as a possible starter over here. Oh, I forgot to say we had a new candidate that was selected for the final squad there. That is Christ Inao Ulei. I think he's going to be called just Ulei or Christ Ulei there. So he did make the final squad there. Kind of an exciting young candidate. Making the cut. And let's move on upfield to the attacking midfield. We begin with left attackers, where we have a surprise to start with. Simon Adingra, a definite candidate for us in part 1, only selected for the preliminary squad. They say fitness was the issue, but we're not sure because he is playing for his club. But anyway, Simon Adingra just making the preliminary squad here. No candidates at the likely level, but we have 2 or 3 at the possible level, 2 of them making it. Yan Diomande was selected for the squad, as was Bazumana Toure. If you're watching the YouTube, you see that their name is in orange script. That means they just came in during this period. So both of those new players to the squad making the cut. The third one, the possible candidate Parfait Guillagon, just making the preliminary squad there. However, we put newcomer Wilfred Zaha on our list. Newcomer not meaning he's new to the squad, but we hadn't talked about him in part 1 because he hadn't played for the team or even appeared for the team in 2024 or 2025. So he's new to our list, but making a return, Wilfred Zaha, and he was selected for the final squad there. In terms of starters, we think we give a possible starter to Yan Diomande and then 1 to Wilfred Zaha. We also think Wilfried Zaha could be a starting forward. He really plays a lot of positions. He could be a right attacking midfielder as well. Anyway, we move on to right attacking midfielders. Here, the only names we had on the squad were all at the likely level, three of them. The first one is a surprise, though. Nicolas Pepe, not selected for the final squad. No reason for that other than the coach's selection. But the other two candidates were selected, Umar Diakite and Ahmad Diallo, both of those making the final cut. On to central attacker. Oh, no, I didn't talk about starters. Again, things were very unstable on this side, so it was very difficult to us to land on a name that we really thought would start. All we have over here is Ahmad Diallo as a possible starter. Okay, now we're ready to go to central attack here. Our first candidate on the list is just at the possible level here. It is Jeremy Boga, and he only made the preliminary squad there. And yeah, we did have other candidates, but we're not going to talk about candidates below that level. Our overall thinking on the central attacking player is that they won't use this position, or if they do use a 4-2-3-1 formation, it'll be one of the central midfielders filling the role there. Okay, so no predictions for that, for players in that position. On we go to the forward line. I'll start with our likely candidate, Sebastian Haller, being selected for the squad, but then having to be withdrawn due to injury. So that's why we have him in purple on the YouTube there. The surprise, though, was our definite candidate, Yvan Gassond. Yvan Gassond not selected for the final squad there, which was a surprise. However, he was brought back in to replace Sebastian Haller, so ultimately does make the squad there. So we have Yvan Gassond, and then two of our three possible candidates also made the squad. That is Vakun Issouf Bayo, or Vakun Bayo, was selected, and Jean-Philippe Crasso also selected for the squad there. In terms of starters, we think that all three of them could be starters here. We'd probably do it in this order, though. Jean-Philippe Crasso, then Vakun Bayo, then Yvan Gassond. Yvan Gassond kind of moves down a little bit because he hadn't been selected for the final squad. So perhaps the manager not valuing him as much as the others. All right, that is it for the Spotlight review. We move on to our next order of business in section 3 here, a review of the surprises. So notable non-selections, Wilfried Singo, the right back, not selected for the squad. That was due to injury, so we'll talk about that shortly in the injury section. The second one, Simon Adingra, the left attacking midfielder, not selected for the squad. Fitness issues cited there, although we were a bit skeptical there. Anyway, Simon Adingra not selected for the final squad, just the preliminary squad. And Nicolas Pepe also, well, we had him as a likely candidate. Wilfried Singo and Simon Adingra were definite candidates for us, so big surprises. Nicolas Pepe a little less so, but we did think he was likely. And also a big surprise was Yvan Gassond, the forward, not being selected for the initial final squad. However, he was a definite candidate for us. However, he was brought back in to replace the injured Sebastian Haller there. Okay, unexpected inclusions. We have Jean-Michel Seri, who seemed to be off the squad. He actually did play a role at the beginning of the period, so maybe we should have had him as possible, but unlikely. But anyway, he had last appeared in October 2024, but was kind of called back into the squad there. We could put Wilfred Zaha in that category, but actually we consider him a new player because we didn't introduce him in part one. The reason for that being is that he hadn't played in 2024 or 2025. But Wilfred Zaha is, we consider a new player, as in he wasn't in part one of our media cast. That was a surprise, as I said, hadn't appeared in 2021, had last appeared in October of 2023. The other one is Christ Inau Ulei, the central midfielder. The 19-year-old surprise selection here, making the final cut there. Those are the only two that we hadn't introduced in part one. Now we go to the injury situation, and if you're watching the YouTube, you'll see the injury list that we compiled in part one. And so let's go through these players. Well, the first two, Maury Gabain and Parfait Guillagon, we already knew at the end of part one that they had recovered from injuries. Injuries that kept them out of the October games there. Maury Gabain was back in action in early November. Maury Gabain, but he only made the preliminary squad. So we don't think the injury really played a role in his non-selection there. He had been a possible but unlikely candidate. The other one was Parfait Guillagon. Again, he had been injured for the October internationals, but was back in action by the time we did part one of the media cast. He had been a possible candidate. So again, we don't think the injury was the reason that he was not selected. He just made the preliminary squad there. Next, we had sorry, let's go in order here. Next, we had Hussein Kamara. Hussein Kamara was a left back. He had been out with a heel spur since late November, but he had been expected back on December 20th. And in fact, he was able to play for his club for a half of a game at least on December 21st. So here too, we think the injury was not part of the reason for his non-selection. And so we are going to put him in the injured but not a strong candidate section there. Or no, he's not injured. So we put him in the recovered from injury, but we don't think that I'm putting them in the wrong place here. We don't think that the injury was the reason that he was not selected. That's what I was trying to say. Next, we look at Wilfred Singo. We think he definitely would have been selected for the final squad. He was out with 3 separate injuries over the period, but it was really just one injury, a recurring hamstring injury. But he did play games in between those periods when he was out. He was expected to return on December 27th, and that's where we were at when we did part one. However, he has not played for his club since November 22nd now, and the prognosis has changed to an unknown return date for him. So Wilfred Singo dropped due to injury. He did make the preliminary squad there, but would have made the final squad there had he been available. But Wilfred Singo dropped due to injury. I'm just going to move Kamara Hassan there to the recovered from injury section. My graphics are all over the place here. Okay, I think I got them sorted out there. Next, we have Christopher Operi. Christopher Operi, at the end of part one, his situation was unknown, and unknown injury since late October, and an unknown return date at the end of part one. However, we now see he is recovered. He started for his club on November 29th there, and Christopher Operi was selected for the final squad there. So recovered from injury as well. Okay, now we have a couple of new injuries to look at. The first one, of course, Sebastian Haller picked up a hamstring injury while playing for his club on December 14th. So that injury typically takes 6 weeks, they say, to recover from. And so no chance of him being a part of the squad. So he was withdrawn from the squad and replaced by Yvon Gasson. There, so we'll have to put him in the dropped due to injury category. And then one other injury to defensive midfielder Kader Keita. This is a bit of a weird one. He's listed as injured with an unknown injury on his international page, but there's no sign of the injury on his club page, and actually he has played without interruption up until December 21st. He only missed one game, but that was due to a yellow card suspension. So is he injured or not? We don't know, but he was a possible but unlikely candidate anyway. So we're going to put him in the injured, but was not a strong candidate there. Okay, moving on to closing thoughts. At the end of part one, we were a bit critical of Ivory Coast, especially in the forward areas where they were swapping players in and out, such that, it's hard to imagine how any consistency could have been created. And we would have thought that the last African Cup would have taught them their lesson and that they would do better with a bit more consistency. Perhaps they were aiming for that by just bringing 26 players to the Cup. But we are still seeing quite a bit of in and out, again, especially in the forward positions. So it's not necessarily a formula for success, sticking with the same players, but it has been, we think, a bit of a problem for Ivory Coast over the period. So maybe a couple of steps towards addressing that problem, especially by choosing 26 instead of 28 players. But I think that is something to keep an eye on in the Cup. Are they going to be swapping in and out or finding a consistency in the positions? All right, that brings us to the end. Those are our closing thoughts, and now we move to our closing graphics to conclude here. And so we hope you enjoyed our look at Ivory Coast players. Getting to know the players makes it a bit more enjoyable to watch on the field, and we hope you join us for our next team. We would like to thank Pixabay and Cold Fingers for the wonderful music used in this mediacast. The title of the piece is Eid Mubarak.